the United States really isn't a country at all. It's a continent. Each of the individual states is a country. If the 50 states split into 50 separate countries, California, I think, would be one of the top 3 countries in terms of population, GDP, everything. My home state of Pennsylvania is in some ways larger than Sweden, right? So to the extent that we point to other countries and say, well, they're doing this and these other people are doing that, our states can do all of those things as well. They're already the size of countries.
Spit that shit out, man! That's on flip script.
First, I have to ask how James is doing and if you're keeping him in line. I watched his Electoral College presentation, and of course it was wonderful. I'm going to bust his chops a little bit about some of it, but obviously he knows he's forgotten a million times more than I've ever known about the Electoral College. But
you really should, and not just his but mine as well. One of the things that we really one of the things we want to do is to engage with people who disagree. And too many people in libertarian circles just spend 100% of their time preaching to the choir and cheerleading. It's just useless.
Well, I think that's
to the extent we can have a nice conversation and disagree, that's wonderful.
Well, even given James's proclivity for being taciturn, I think we can work through that.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, Anthony, we wanted to talk to you about start off basically about. Some of your thoughts on now here we are in what seems like a third wave of shutdowns.
Was it April that we had Antony on? I think it was maybe early April.
Somewhere around then with the first wave of shutdowns. And we were talking about how important it was to include the economic devastation that comes from a shutdown in the calculus along with the pandemic. And now here we are looking like we're on wave 3. And we had a restaurateur from Southern California last time. Telling us how hard it was for him and how the government in typical fashion comes in with an axe instead of a scalpel. And, we've seen some of that on TV as well, but we wanted your thoughts on that. And then we wanted to jump into you telling us about your book, Cooperation and Coercion, which I read last night and I loved it. It's really pretty good. I've got a couple of quotes.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
A couple of quotes. I will fully recommend it. But there's a couple of quotes that I really loved in it. We'll get to that later. But anyway, just Cooperation and Coercion by Professor Antony Davis and Professor James Harrigan. So everybody keep that in mind while we start here. But so what are your thoughts on these new latest round of shutdowns and restrictions the government's imposing on the businesses?
Well, we're things are playing out more or less the way economists had predicted. And not to say that economists are brilliant about this. All we did was look at what was happening and drew a straight line. And what we're seeing is pretty much, coast to coast, a third of small businesses closing, likely never to reopen. That on top of the Congressional Budget Office is now estimating about $15 or $16 trillion in total cost over the next 5 years. And that cost is not, the stimulus money the government's spending. Rather, it's GDP that we would have produced otherwise, but now are not producing. Now, there's an open question as to, you say that the whole COVID business is going to cost us $15 trillion. How much of that is due to the virus and how much is due to the shutdown? In other words, if we hadn't locked down businesses, is it the case that we still would have incurred economic loss simply because people would voluntarily not go out? Of course, number of deaths would be much higher, this sort of thing. And all of that for the moment's an open question. We won't have real numbers on that probably for several years. But there are other things we can look at. The worst. Now I'm going to preface this by saying the other things we can look at aren't perfect by any means, but they're kind of like the only thing we can look at. And that is the worst situations of flu epidemics in this country. And economists estimate that the worst flu epidemics cost us around $100 billion in lost GDP. Now, we can argue about the numbers, whether that's right or wrong or what have you, but the fact is the difference between 15 trillion and 100 billion is so huge that, you can be off on your flu estimates by a factor of 10 and still not come close to what the whole COVID business is costing us. So again, I leave that as an open thing. But the fact is, it's costly. It cost us a lot. And at the end of the day, I think what we need to do, and this is what economists would say, is you can't say the lockdown saved lives. What you can say is that it saved lives from COVID in exchange for other things. And those other things are, amongst that, businesses being lost, people's livelihoods being lost, but also lives lost due to things like depression, domestic violence, these sorts of things that came about because of the lockdown.
And go ahead, Britt.
Oh, Antony, I think I know the answer to this, but I'd love to hear your perspective anyway. As a mom here in Oregon, it's interesting to watch and frustrating to watch my nieces and nephews in Kansas go to school, have delightful livelihoods, and live fairly normal lifestyles, and then watch the subtle but very clear psychological ramifications of my own children here in Oregon dealing with what people are trying to call online school, if it can even be called that. So from your libertarian perspective, do you agree that the restrictions and the regulations that are passed should be left to the power of the states and the state governors?
I think so. And we can find some issues around the edges where we could, I would back off on this, but generally speaking, yeah, I think it should be left to the state governors. Even better than that, it should be left to the city mayors. And the reason I say that is because COVID isn't a generic disease that hits everybody the same. It hits the elderly very differently than it hits the young. So much so that, for all practical purposes, it might as well be two different diseases. The mortality rate for the over 85 years old population is something in the order of, whatever it is, 40% or something ungodly high. Meanwhile, the fatality rate for people in 18 to 24-year-old range is virtually zero. It's not zero, but it's virtually zero. To put it in perspective, more college age people in the United States died of alcohol poisoning last year than died of COVID this. And so when put in perspective, you realize, the disease is very different. It's not just across ages, but you mentioned Kansas. The disease plays out very differently in high population versus low population areas. And so when you put all this together, what you find is there is no right response to COVID. There's a right response for one area of the country, a different right response for another area of the country. And to the extent that we let these decisions be made at the lowest possible practical level governmentally, the more tailored our solutions will be to particular instances rather than trying to impose a one size fits no one. Mm-hmm. Now I'll point to Donald Trump here, and I'm not a defender of Donald Trump by any means, but I think one of the things that people get wrong is when they jump on him about not giving a national response. I don't think we wanted a national response. That would have been the exact opposite of tailoring the response to particular areas.
Antony, is there a pitfall to? I understand it's an easy statistic and the most obvious one to grab, but is there a pitfall to using deaths as the kind of baseline statistic of, saying, well, 40% of older people and then a much lower percentage of teenagers and younger people? Does that not take into account people who have gotten it and will deal with long-term effects and things like that?
Yeah, it doesn't count for long-term effects. Now, that the fact that there are long-term ramifications is something that's just now coming to light. And even then, it's not clear what those are, if they apply in all cases, that sort of thing. But to the extent that that is an issue, that once you get it, even if you recover from it, there are long-term effects, that's certainly something to take into account. And it's not just deaths. Yes, it's deaths, it's long-term effect as well, but it's also livelihoods. We can, on the one hand, it kind of feels right to say things like you shouldn't balance some, people's incomes against people's lives. And that's easy to say if you still have your job. It's much harder to say if you've lost your job, you don't know how, you're going to lose your house or whatever it is. And you realize there really is a balance to be had there. So there is no right answer in terms of what is it. I should say it differently. There is no single number you can point to when you talk about the cost of COVID, the cost of the lockdown. Rather, it's this suite of things, and our response, how we deal with COVID, really what it does is it alters the weight of these various things. So we get more losses in one area and fewer losses in another.
So ergo, your position, which I kind of tend to agree with now, that a national response would have been foolish, especially in a country this large and geographically diverse.
I think so. Now there are instances in which a national response would have been a good idea, and that is if the national response were not selecting the solution, but rather enabling lower levels of government to select solutions. So if the federal government said something like, look, we're not going to make any policy about lockdown one way or the other, but we, the federal government, will make available to state and local governments X amount of money so that they can do whatever they think is right for their locales. I think that would have been a reasonable national response.
And AJ basically asked my question. You answered, but I'll add a little to that, circling back to a national response, because I guess that's how you define a national response. I would have looked at at least, and let me boldly say, not lying about it, not underplaying it, but being transparent, and then empowering and facilitating state cooperation with this whole thing, but and modeling appropriate, sensible behavior. And instead of now we're bifurcated with this political divide, and we're like working against each other.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Marty. And I think one of the problems that we had with honesty, and it goes in both directions, at the outset, back in March or April, the only thing we heard about was number of people who are going to die from COVID if we don't do something. Nowhere did you hear politicians saying, but it's going to cost us so much in terms of jobs and whatnot. And then later on, as the thing starts to wane in the summer, you hear, from not necessarily from politicians, but from many quarters, the opposite. You only hear about the number of jobs that were lost. You don't hear about the number of lives that are being saved. And I think you're absolutely right. What's necessary here is an honest approach. Let's look at the costs across the board and then make a decision as to what it is we should do.
And it seems like the impulse, of course, in today's climate is to go to an extreme all or nothing. I'm thinking of people who say, if masks work so well, why are people dying? We don't know, if nobody was wearing masks, how many more people would be dying, or, it seems like we're looking for a magic bullet. And if something doesn't prove to be a magic bullet, then it's not worth doing at all.
Yeah, that's correct. Part of what goes on is we become afraid. And when we become afraid, we want a magic bullet. We feel much more comfortable when someone comes forward and says, I have the solution. And we have to keep in mind that there is no solution. There are better ways of dealing with it and worse ways to dealing with it. I think one of the problems that arises here is a problem that has plagued this country for decades now. And that is we're becoming so increasingly divided, broadly speaking, left versus right, so that if someone comes on and says, I think the solution should be X, the first thing that many people do is not ask what are the details of this solution, the pros and the cons. They ask instead, where's this guy coming from? Is he a Democrat or Republican? And, if he's a member of your party, whatever he said was great. If he's a member of the other party, whatever he said was awful. And so we end up not addressing COVID. We end up taking out our frustrations on the other side by enacting or withdrawing policies.
Well, that's awesome, and I want to dovetail that into your book. And I have, there's so many awesome statistics and analyses in here. But Brett, if you don't mind, I didn't, of course, come prepared without my reading glasses and screwing up the schedule. But Brett, do you mind reading this because it totally encapsulates
my 2020 vision. Would love to read it for you, Mark.
America right now. She's 1 or 2 years younger than I am too.
Just 1 or 2.
I mean, decades. Sorry.
Where do I start, darling?
You see where I have the
an argument?
Yeah.
An argument intended to manipulate can stand on emotion, but an argument intended to persuade must stand on fact and reason. And politicians typically argue from emotion when facts and reasons don't cooperate.
Thanks, Brett. So my question, Anthony, is there any arguments that aren't fact or that aren't emotion based anymore? I mean, if it's not a tweet or a podcast like this or your podcast, Words and Numbers, you and James's, where do we go? What do we do? I haven't seen any. Nobody's interested in reading, I'll talk on social media about the Mueller report, for example. I don't know anyone who's read it but me.
Yeah. I think the thing we need to remember is we're human beings, and human beings are agents of both intellect and emotion. You can't say we need to make decisions devoid of emotion. But I think I'll go back to something my mother would always tell me when I was growing up, which is that the heart emotions are fabulous for pointing out problems, but they're horrible for finding solutions to them. And so to the extent that we can embrace, and we've kind of split, and I'm going to say the following very, very broadly. We kind of split where the left tends to go to emotion, where the right tends to go to reason. Not to say that there's not a tremendous amount of overlap, but on average, we tend to go in that direction. And that's the thing that's, I think, most damaging to this country, that a full human being has both of these things, brings both of them to bear. And if you employ only the heart without reason, you end up just grasping at the first thing that comes along that looks good. And you get lots of these arguments that you'll hear from libertarians about government policy, that we have this tendency to enact policies that mean well without thinking through their actual effects. But then if you go in the other direction and you ignore the emotion, you look only at the reason, you end up making heartless decisions. So we say things like, okay, it's economically inefficient to have a welfare state for all these various reasons that we could spend an entire episode talking about. Therefore, we should not have any government support for the poor. Well, okay, I can make that argument from reason, but what I've done is I've inadvertently dehumanized the poor. Because the fact is, if you've got people who are starving in the street for reasons that are beyond their fault, we need to do something about that. To hell with whether it's economically efficient. This is not morally right. And so you notice the right approach here is to maintain those two things in opposition, in balance, reason and emotion. And we don't do that. We split ourselves in half, and one half of us uses the emotion, the other half uses the reason, and we end up not talking to each other anymore.
Yeah. Well, I've always said that everything in life is yin and yang, everything is balance.
Yeah, exactly.
But I have been a little jaded. As much as I've absolutely loved San Francisco, I mean, the political management there, the policymakers, I mean, it's almost like they'd rather support someone's right to live in the street when they're mentally ill and drug addicted and die in a puddle of their own urine than actually just take them off the street and put them in an institution where they can get some of the help that they need.
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember here is that politicians, and again, I'll speak broadly, doesn't apply to all of them, but it does apply on average. Politicians' goal is not to solve problems, it's to get elected. And if the people believe that the right thing to do is policies A, B, and C, the politicians have an incentive to pursue policies A, B, and C, even if the politicians know that those policies are useless or even counterproductive. Why? Because if they don't pursue policies A, B, and C, the other guy's going to get elected, and he'll do what? He'll pursue policies A, B, and C. So if we're going to pursue policies A, B, and C otherwise, because that's what the voters want, better it be me that's in office than the other guy. And so you get the politicians reflecting the voters. And I'll always point back to the voters and say, if we have a problem here and we'd like to blame government, and I'll be the first to put my hand up and start to blame government, remember that government is in effect. The cause is the voters.
And so is it the too emotional voter? Is it the too tribal voter? Is it the poorly informed voter? What's the root of
It's the voter who cares enough to want to do something, but not enough to think through the consequences of what he does.
Yeah. Right. And those of us that aren't economists probably are not, that we don't exercise that muscle quite as efficiently.
And let me underline here that this isn't some esoteric thing that only the economists would know. Anybody can know this, right? It's just a matter of thinking through human behavior and incentives. But it requires taking the time and being a little bit dispassionate and saying, okay, yeah, I understand this policy means well, and I wish with all my heart we had it, but we got to think through how it would actually play out. You got to do that. That requires a little bit of discipline.
Well, and Anthony, I'm echoing what you wrote in your book, or you addressed this in your book a little bit, and it's perfectly encapsulated, at least for me, in California, where they have, like, you go to the ballot, your polling place, and there's a ballot with like 20 referendums. And I look at that as the politicians abdicating their responsibility. They have these write-ups, like 4 or 5 paragraph write-ups in detail. And I'm looking at them all. And I'm like, well, how does this affect this referendum? How do they all combine synergistically to make sensible, smart policy? Do your damn jobs, and then, articulate that to us. And you don't get that. But so I did want to ask you about the inception of your book, you and James's book, and how that all unfolded. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the book was transforming for us. I think perhaps me more so than James. I went into this book as a pretty staunch anarchist, and my intent with this book was to lay out a strong argument for why government is actually always a bad idea, and people are, individual voluntary action is the right solution all the time. And of course, James is a little bit softer on that, but he comes from, the background of political science. He understands government to an extent that, to a depth that I don't, only looking at the economic side of things. But what happened was kind of interesting. We lay out this book, Cooperation and Coercion, and throughout, we're showing cooperation is good, coercion is bad, until we get to the last chapter. And all of a sudden, things started not to fit well. I found myself making arguments that were contradictory to arguments I'd made earlier in the book, and nothing was it was like we had a puzzle piece from a different puzzle and trying to fit it into this one. Nothing's fitting. And we sat down, talked about it for a long time, and came to the conclusion that story, cooperation good, coercion bad, is the wrong story. That's not right. The right story is that every time humans come together to do anything where there's more than one of us, we organize ourselves in one of two ways, either via cooperation or via coercion. And via cooperation, think of things like your local church or a civic organization, or something like this. Even a family, you come together voluntarily and you do things. As long as things are working out, people stay together. In fact, you'll attract more people and they'll come and they'll help you out. And if things start to not work out, what do? You say, look, I've had enough of this. This is a waste of my time. I'm going somewhere else. I'm going to take my time and talent and treasure and devote it to some other activity. And so with cooperation, you kind of have this constant adaptation, evolution going on of groups of people coming together and growing or dispersing or whatever it is as they pursue the things that the people want to pursue. The other angle is coercion, where we have some people who are in charge. However they got there is another matter, whether they're elected or appointed or whatever it is. But we have people in charge, and people in charge are going to tell the rest of us, here's what you're going to do.
Kind of like AJ on this podcast.
Yeah, as we went back and thought this through, we realized that the right story here is not that the one organizing principle is good and the other one's bad, but rather that sometimes one organizing principle is the better one. Other times the other organizing principle is the better one. And so it became kind of, we came up with the title late in the game, but what we were writing was cooperation or coercion. What we ended up writing was cooperation and coercion, that there are instances in which government force is necessary, or force is necessary. Government's typically the tool we use. But the trick to doing things well is knowing what problem should match with which solution.
So applying that to COVID then, Antony, it seems to me that at least psychologically, many people are hungering for what might be intelligent coercion, somebody to tell them what the right path is and to kind of lay down the law. Here's what we can do. Here's what we can't do. And then, but also then what's needed after that is you need people want someone that is able to tell them that, but then also to coerce people to actually follow it. It seems like in this instance, do we need both? Is it an and, not an or?
Yeah, the thing we have to be careful of here is, you're absolutely right. There are instances in which we need somebody to tell us what to do. The problem is we too often assume that the person in government knows what to do. And so when the government says, okay, we got to do X, well, of course we have to do X. The government says so, right? And the fact is that people in government are subject to all the same strengths and weaknesses that the rest of us are. So it's not obviously correct. It's not obviously true that the guy in government knows better what I should be doing than I do for myself. So that's one issue. The other issue is, I think when it comes to applying coercion, and I'm thinking like an economist here, there seems to be there's a line we can draw in economics that clearly distinguishes between problems that should involve cooperation and problems that should involve coercion. Now, there's a handful of problems that don't fit nicely into either category, but a large quantity of problems will fall on one or the other side of this line. And this line is drawn by several things economists will talk about: the free rider problem, externalities, their public goods, these sorts of things. And I think where COVID is concerned, the thing that's in play here is what we call an externality. That is, that it's under certain circumstances, it's possible for me in going about my daily life, making decisions for myself, that I impose harm on you. Now, that's a problem if I impose harm on you. As a libertarian, I would say everyone should be free to do whatever it is they want. Big footnote, provided they aren't imposing harm on anybody else. So if I impose harm on you, that becomes an externality. And you can look around. We have laws for this, right? We all accept these sorts of things. Laws against pollution, factories belching, toxins into the air. We have laws about this. And that's an externality. COVID seems to fall. Now, remember, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm an economist. But COVID seems to fall into that category. It looks, from an economics perspective, very much like pollution. And if indeed it has attributes that are similar to pollution, that is, it's possible for me to impose harm on you, then there is a good and right role for government in stepping in preventing this harm in some fashion.
And so would you say that, generally speaking, the United States has hit the mark or missed the mark in its response? And is there an example you can think of globally that you would say this country really hit the mark?
Yeah, I think I'm going out on a limb here because the data's not all in, right? My knee-jerk reaction is we didn't hit the mark. We overstepped it. And I'm going to point to Sweden and say, I think Sweden came closer. And what's the difference between what the U.S. did and what Sweden did? What Sweden did was it gave its people information and said, look, the following things are going to spread this disease. If you do this, the other thing, whatever it is, and best practices to avoiding the disease are the following things. Now, apart from a couple of rules, like I think they banned gatherings more than 50 people or whatever it was, apart from a few small rules, they said to people, go and do as you will, but do it with open eyes. In the U.S., we didn't do that. Now, we did talk about best practices and this sorts of thing, but it was kind of ancillary to the main story. And the main story was politicians saying, here's what you're going to do. And in some cases, the politicians got it right. In other cases, they got it wrong. And what happened? In cases in which they got it right, they protected people who would have been harmed otherwise. In cases in which they got it wrong, they hurt people. And, for example, if I'm going to lock down nursing homes, that's probably right. You're dealing with a concentrated population of the most vulnerable people. And to protect those people from harm, from being harmed by others is a good and right role for government. But to shut down a nightclub where generally, under 30-year-olds congregate who are, the disease hits them very differently, that's probably an overstep. And there I've caused more harm than I've caused good.
Despite the potential for those clubbers to become infection vectors?
Yeah, well, but again, infection vectors for whom? For others of their age. Again, I'm not an epidemiologist, but from the numbers, that seems not to be a big deal. There are other things that are far more deadly to that age group than COVID.
But now, do we live so bifurcated that age groups don't? I mean, won't that eventually jump and reach someone that is in a vulnerable age group?
Yeah, possibly so. But I don't know that that's markedly different than what we've done now. We've just bifurcated in a different way. We've bifurcated along the lines of how you earn your living. So if I can earn my living remotely by a computer, my life hasn't changed. But if I can't, my life is devastated. I think we bifurcated the country. Here, we just bifurcated along the wrong axis.
Well, it sounds like you're saying to quarantine and to bifurcate the most vulnerable and then let the virus burn out among those where it has the least effect. Is that accurate?
I think so. Now, again, I'm not an epidemiologist. An epidemiologist would probably say other things like, well, before you know it, everybody's going to have this disease, this sort of thing. I don't know the right answer to that other than to point to the fact that, at some point, everybody's going to get this thing. You're either going to get it naturally or you're going to get it through the vaccine. But either way, we're going to develop an immunity.
Britt, where do you find yourself as a parent? Where were you early on in the spring? And is it different from where you are now in terms of your patience for policies? Have you changed any or evolved in any way?
Oh gosh, yeah. I feel like I'm becoming more conservative, which scares the shit out of me. I was an admirer of our governor, and now I just think she is pussyfooting her way through baby step political moves to save herself, and it's driving me crazy.
So tell us what you admired and tell us what kind of started to change for you.
I confess I admired her because she was a female and a Democrat and she had gotten herself elected.
Mm-hmm.
That alone is something to be appreciative of.
Yeah.
But as a mom and somebody who's been involved in the social worker world and the teacher world, we have that opportunity of perspective that Antony was talking about earlier. Economists can kind of see the line down the line, and moms can see that too. Moms can see a kid make a mistake. And if you forgive the simple analogy, this whole COVID mess is like a family. If the family's running well and they cooperate, things go fine. But as Antony was implying earlier, and as we all know, bad things will happen. The kids and the people will make bad choices. It's inevitable. And so the challenge is, do you ground the child for a month and do you restrict all their activity and take everything away, and then that has psychological ramifications? Or do you sit down and have a talk with them and educate them about their choices? It's such a hard decision. It's different for every kid, just as different for all the people, because they unfortunately make decisions based on their confirmation bias as opposed to the intelligence. But I think the biggest mistake that we've made that drives me crazy is looking at things with a heavy scientific perspective. And as Antony was saying earlier, I mean, we know in medicine, the holistic approach now is the best approach. We know it's not just shove medicine at somebody who's having problems. We know that massage therapy can be just as effective. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be just effective. So we know that if we just make our decisions based on science, there's a problem there.
There's a hole that's
There's
left.
a major hole. And the social workers and the teachers and the moms especially are seeing it, because this World War I tactic of, instead of, doing surgery on COVID restrictions, we're just chopping off the whole leg. And who gets the brunt of it? The kids who aren't in school anymore and the low income people who can't show up to work. There's no holistic approach, and there's not enough talk about how this is affecting people in all the other ways. And as Antony said, how it's going to affect the economy down the line for other reasons other than medicine and other than people who've caught COVID. It's going to affect them because of the psychological stress, because of the financial stress, because of all the other ramifications that go into a body and how they're affected.
Yeah.
And the kids down the line too. Like we talk about COVID and long-term effects. I mean, I worry about this whole generation of kids, really basically from kindergarten to seniors in college, and how they're being almost set back a year in a lot of ways. It's
this great social experiment that nobody signed up for, but we all have to participate in if we're in certain states. It's a little bit frightening to think about.
I think even in other states, they're participating, but in a different way. Sure. We have friends that live in Nashville. Their kids have been in school, but he told me recently they're really thankful for the holiday break coming up, so that they wouldn't, because there'd been outbreaks and is quarantining. If a kid's exposed, they have to quarantine, and it's like there's been no clean methodology. So it's been stressful, and I think transformative, just in different ways.
Sure.
For everyone.
Antony, I wanted to ask you a question. I've been binge listening to your podcast over the weekend, which is great. I feel like 10% smarter and 30% nerdier. That's good. But like nerdy in the good way. Like I can wear glasses unironically now.
Well, nerd is cool. Nerd is cool.
Nerd is cool. It is. So, I've got two questions for you, but one is hopefully easier. From your perspective as an economist, have we hit rock bottom yet, or is that way further down the line? Where on the spectrum are we?
In terms of the economy?
Just in terms of the economy, job loss, business loss, yeah.
Yeah, where COVID is concerned, yeah. In fact, we turned the corner some time ago. Where if things continue the way they have been going since March, April, May, I would expect that the economy will be pretty much, I'll say, back to normal. I don't think we'll ever be back to normal. Employment will be back to where it was. GDP will be back to where it was roundabout, give or take, March, April, May of 2021.
Wow.
So the economy, what we've really done, that the height of the unemployment rivaled, actually it exceeded in some places the unemployment at the height of the Great Recession. It took us 10 years to come out of the Great Recession to get our employment numbers back to where they were. We have packed in that decade's worth of growth. We packed in about 7 years worth of that decade's worth of growth just in the past 3 months. So the economy is coming back nicely. Now, the problem is it's not going to look exactly like it did before. People have gotten much more used to working remotely. They've gotten out of the habit of going out for dinner. And, as hard as this whole COVID business is, we are saving some money from doing that. So I think people's consumption patterns will change a bit moving forward.
Once restaurants reopen, we're fucking going out to dinner, the three of us. I can tell you that right now.
and as hard as that may be, and as unusual as it may be, I may even have a date after the COVID. Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, the biggest plus to me of the whole lockdown business is it forced the rest of the country to learn how to use Zoom. Now I can communicate with people all over the country without leaving my office.
And migration patterns seem to be really informed. Real estate migration patterns, people moving to towns and states where they weren't able to live before because they had to live in, say, San Francisco, and now choosing to go somewhere where there's a lower cost of living. And we'll see if they can keep that up or if companies are going to try to pull everyone back in.
I can't imagine that companies may want to pull everybody back in. I can't imagine they're going to be successful because we were headed in this direction anyway. The younger generations are much more comfortable with technology. They tend to want a more flexible work environment. So I think this was coming anyway. It would have been 20 years down the road. I think COVID just accelerated the change.
Well, Anthony, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Britt.
What was your second question, Britt? I know you said you had a second.
Oh, well, it's kind of tied in. Antony, let me ask you this. So I fit into some of your groups that you like to categorize. I am a working mom. Well, I was a working mom. So I started a job in January, so I wouldn't have been counted last year as one of the employed. I quit my job in the middle of October once I realized that there was no possible way to keep my family's sanity or keep my job at the same time. I'm pretty sure, because I worked for a small business, we'll see, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to see a 1099 at the end of the year. So I won't fit easily into a bar graph because I don't even know if the government knows that I contributed to the workforce or contributed to the economy. So I'm only one person, but I'm one of many, just thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who work in the gig economy or work under the table or for various reasons can't be counted on a neat and pretty W-2 or can't be put into a bar graph. So how do you guys factor in all of the people like us when you're counting unemployment?
There are ways to estimate these sorts of things. So you'll get the official unemployment numbers. In fact, we have 6 categories, U1 through U6. When people talk about unemployment on the news, they're actually talking about what we call U3. It's one of the ways of calculating unemployment. So as long as there are some numbers on you appearing somewhere, some business paid you and they've written it down somewhere, you do end up in the numbers. You may not end up in the official U3 numbers, but you end up somewhere else. Now, the question is, well, what if nobody writes down anything for you? So you are working completely under the table. Then we have no numbers. There is no way to know what you are. And economists have estimated the size of that shadow economy, the economy that we aren't able to measure. And the fact of the matter is, in some sense, it doesn't matter as much that we can't measure it, as long as that shadow economy remains roughly the same fraction of the full economy. Because what we care about ultimately is the economic growth. You say, all right, GDP went up 3%. That's good news. That's what we care about. The actual number doesn't matter that much, 20 trillion, 21 trillion. What matters is it went up 3%. So if what we can measure went up 3%, it's likely the case that the stuff we can't measure also went up 3%.
So you're just saying I'm a margin of error? Is that it, Antony?
No. I'm not saying you're a margin of error. What I'm saying is that what we're saying is the thing we can see grew by
It's
a
the
certain
economic
amount.
growth, right?
Therefore, it's a safe bet that this thing that we can't see also grew by that same amount.
Interesting.
Even the boats we can't see are rising or sinking.
Sinking.
Right. Well, Britt was an illegal arms dealer, so she definitely is not.
You weren't
on
supposed
the
to tell
books
him.
anywhere.
She's on the FBI's list, though, so she's written down somewhere.
This is part of her probation.
I want to circle back to Britt's first question, Anthony, because we both made facial expressions at each other. She couldn't tell mine because I accidentally shaved my eyebrows last night. they were mocking me last time about my bushy eyebrows. So I was doing a little trim job last night, and it all got corkscrewed. So I just knocked them all. I knocked them all down. So now AJ,
no, it's uncanny valley in here.
AJ says I look like a turtle.
So you said it was a bandwidth problem, but really the reason we don't have our cameras on is because of your eyebrows?
Well, thanks for outing me. Thanks for outing me publicly. So, but yeah, that's part of it. But anyway, we're talking about the economy turning the corner and anything. But what jumps out at me is that isn't that going to be leaving us with a massive debt that we need to climb out of? And how's that going to play into the whole calculus about the economy getting back to normal?
Yeah, and that's something that's going to be changing over the next few years. And again, we were headed in this direction anyway. COVID accelerated it, and that is that the government has kind of painted itself into a corner. It has taken on so much, and by government I mean the federal government largely, has taken on so much responsibility and expanded into all sorts of areas of our lives it really wasn't designed to expand into. And as with all things government, once you start something, it's really hard to stop it or even cut it back. We have reached the point this year where we really can't borrow anymore. We've borrowed so much. We're starting to run out of places on planet Earth to borrow more. Now, there are places that will lend us more money. Foreigners will lend us more money. American people will loan the federal government more money. But the amount that they're loaning is slowing down. And it's slowing down now it's growing at a slower rate than the federal debt is growing. So where's the government coming up with the money that it's spending? Well, largely it's starting to print it. It's just printing the money. And we all know what happens when you print money. You get inflation.
Wait, for real?
Sorry?
For real? This is happening?
Yeah. Well,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you get, yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. Now people say, well, okay, the government's printing money, but I don't see any inflation. Where is it? The fact is we do see it. We just don't call it inflation. Look at what the stock market has done since March. This is weird. We've gone into this unprecedented lockdown, costing us more than what it cost us to negotiate World War II. We've engaged in this huge lockdown. The economy has tanked. The unemployment has gone through the roof, and yet the stock market went up. How can that be? And it's because that's where the money's going. As the government's printing money, it's going not into the market for goods and services. It's going largely into financial markets, causing prices there to go up. And we don't see it as inflation. First off, we don't count it as inflation. When we talk about actual inflation numbers, inflation is the rise in the prices of goods and services, not the rise in the price of financial instruments. So for one thing, we don't count it. For the other thing, we tend to look at it as a good thing. So the stock market's up. Things must be going well. Yeah, the reason the stock market's up is not because things are going well. It's up because the Federal Reserve has printed a bunch of money and it's caused these prices to rise. Now, what'll happen eventually? Eventually things will calm down. People will go back to purchasing more goods and services, and that money will start to move out of the financial markets into the goods and services markets. And when that happens, you'll see the official inflation numbers start to rise. Where's it coming from? It's coming from the fact that the government can't afford the amount that it's spending. And so what's happening? The Federal Reserve is printing the money that the government now needs to spend.
Well, Anthony, you're going to let us know when we need to start buying gold from Glenn Beck and Cougar Ranch and that sort of thing, right?
Please.
Get out of the market.
Yeah, see, this goes beyond my level of expertise. What do you do with this thing? I don't know. I hope that the Federal Reserve, I talked to actually a Federal Reserve banker some years ago talking about this exact problem. And he said, the thing that keeps me up at night is knowing when's the right time to start pulling the money back contracting the money supply before these dollars make their way into the markets for goods and services. And he and I had this conversation, good Lord, maybe 8 or 10 years ago. Since then, we've reached this point that I don't think the Federal Reserve can pull that money back. The government needs it.
Oh, I wonder how that's going to affect things like cryptocurrency and the dollar. The dollar is the standard worldwide.
Well, that's going to be interesting because I think that one of the paths out of this is cryptocurrency. Now, whether it's Bitcoin or some other version, I don't know. But I think cryptocurrency in general is the path out of here because cryptocurrency can't be controlled by any government. And so what you'll have, I don't think government currencies will ever go away, but I think what we will have moving forward is that cryptocurrency will be an alternative that's always there on the side. And for our government or any government who starts to inflate its currency, the people will just shift. They'll start to do more and more of their transactions in cryptocurrency. And this will provide a natural market break on the government. It's going to have to restrict the amount of printing that goes on. Look, this is what goes on in the marketplace, and it's why people, even my friends on the hard left who are skeptical of markets, understand the power of competition and the danger of monopoly. The power of competition is you have lots of businesses competing, trying to do better for customers who are free to come and go. And the problem with monopoly is, well, there's no competition. There's no place to go. This monopoly can do whatever it wants to me. Well, now look at the political sphere, because a federal government is that. It's a monopoly. It's a monopoly on power. The states, they're competitive. If I don't like what's going on in California, I can move to Oregon. If I don't like what's going on there, I can move to Nebraska. So I think the first answer to approaching things surgically is to approach them at a state level, not a federal level. And this is a return. It's a return to federalism. It's the way we were designed. Originally, the federal government was not supposed to be the major form of government. The states were supposed to be the major form of government. Federal government was restricted to 8 specific things that it would do. Now, for all sorts of reasons that everybody can agree to involving slavery and the Civil War, that all went to hell. But I think in some sense, we threw out the baby with the bathwater. There was certainly a problem when it came to the issue of slavery with having states have primacy. But once that problem is addressed and it's now off the table, I think we need to think to going back to that model of having the states handle the bulk of governing. And when you do that, you're not guaranteed to get surgical responses like you're looking for, but what you are going to get are 50 experiments. And some states are going to try to deal with problems in some ways, and other states will try to deal with problems in other ways. And the ones that are successful will be examples to the ones that aren't, and the ones that aren't will be warnings to the others. And we'll learn through an iterative means like this.
So how do we do that in the modern age? Right. Yeah. Is there a way to actually do that, to make it leap off the page and into reality?
Yeah, ultimately you cannot do anything that people aren't willing to do. Now you can say, well, you should put it in the Constitution. It's already in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 lists 8 things the federal government is allowed to do, and that's it. It's not allowed to do anything else. And yet we just ignore that, and we went our merry way, letting the federal government do all sorts of things. How come? Because that's what people wanted. We've got to start off with the people, where the people need to realize the federal government is not the place you should turn initially when you have a problem. Like we did with the COVID, and say, well, what is Trump doing? That's not where you go. You go to your mayor, then you go to your governor, and only go to the federal government when those two groups are incapable of dealing with the problem. I'll give you an example of this. You talk about surgically. One of my beautiful, one of the examples I like the best of a surgical response is how some states deal with carbon emissions. And I know New York State was doing this. I don't know if they still are, but they were doing it when I was up there. They would issue carbon tax credits. So if you're a company and you're emitting carbon into the atmosphere, and the state has determined we don't want more than X tons of carbon emitted statewide, so it would issue licenses to the various states. You can emit a certain amount of carbon. And here's the surgical part. These licenses, the credits, or transferable, which means I as a business owner, have an incentive to invest in cleaner technology. Why? Because then I won't need my carbon credits, which means I can sell them to someone who does.
But Anthony,
and I can help to recoup some of my investment.
Wasn't that like, I mean, I remember back in the Reagan days and Milton Friedman talking about doing that. Then all of a sudden, when Obama and some others, Democrats, suggested it, all of a sudden the Republicans, conservatives started calling it, well, I don't know what they called it except wrong, and they weren't willing to get on board. It's so frustrating.
And this goes back to the thing I was saying earlier of how somehow we've separated ourselves into the left and the right, and it doesn't matter what politician X says. If politician X is part of my party, he's said the right thing. If he's part of the other party, he said the wrong thing. And somehow we've ceased to become a nation of people engaged in democracy and politics in the good sense, and we become a bunch of cheerleaders with two football teams, and you follow your football team for good or ill.
Yeah, it has become the new sports. I mean, again, going back to Britt's family analogy, it sounds like there's a whole lot of kids that need a spanking. Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No,
am I dated?
They need what Antony said. They need a sticker chart and positive reinforcement.
That's right.
Candy.
Candy. That's awesome. Everybody needs to shave their eyebrows.
You're
That's what
aging
I gotta
yourself. Anthony, you make me want to invest in Bitcoin and go live in a cabin in the woods.
No, not at all. Because I think what you're doing here with your podcast and what we try to do on Words and Numbers is the right approach. And that is to convince your listeners that the other side, whichever side is the other side, is not evil. That your neighbors who vote the other way are looking for the same things you want. Everybody wants better education. Everybody wants their grandparents to have decent health care. Everybody wants students to have loans that are manageable. Where we differ, to the extent that we do, is not on the ends. We have different views as to how to achieve the ends. But if we all start off by recognizing that our brothers and sisters on the left and right all want the same thing, I think that goes a tremendous way forward toward reuniting what we call the left and the right.
Yeah, awareness. And so it's interesting because some of my friends in rural Pennsylvania, who I don't for one second think that I'm smarter than, one of the things this one friend of mine pointed out was, and this guy's a very highly accomplished, educated, successful business person. He said, maybe we're just tired of you West Coast elite or you coastal elitists telling us what to do. And I'm like, who is telling you what to do, dude? You are prospering in rural Pennsylvania. But again, it goes back to that balance of emotion and intellect. And again, he's got both, and so do I. But we've got to somehow come together. I think maybe starting with what you're saying is not labeling each other as the other, which we're very good at doing, and then trying to move forward from there.
And remember, who benefits most from us seeing each other as the other are the politicians.
Yeah, in the media.
Because so long as we're pitted against each other, we'll go out in droves to vote to make sure our football team wins.
Absolutely, and watch our channel and read our outlets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My only issue with the football analogy is that Penn State can do no wrong.
Yeah, Marty's very objective when it comes to Penn State.
Yeah,
okay.
That's a blind spot for me.
Well, Antony, we want to be respectful of your time. You've given us so much to think about. We could, just this last 10 minutes could be a podcast all on its own. Guys, any last questions? Anything? Looks like we covered it all, Antony.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you said respectful of time, since I already screwed him out of an hour because of my scheduling error, I don't want to add on to that. But it's always great chatting. You know that, Antony, and we really appreciate you. And I will say that James Harrigan, your partner and co-author of the book, and your partner and co-host in the podcast, he's going to want to come on just for clarifications and corrections to this. So I'm going to be reaching out to him pretty soon, so you can warn him. He can't hide. And I also said, my niece is at ASU, and I told her to go to his office hours and turn him upside down and shake the lunch money out of his pockets too. So
That's right.
We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on. I always enjoy coming on. I think you all are doing a great job, and best of luck to you and your podcast.
You as well, Antony.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.